Well, just to say a few words before I get right into that, well, it's changing in Cyprus as well, actually. We already have the national policy statement for entrepreneurship. It was with the involvement of all the stakeholders in Cyprus, like CEL, Startup Cyprus, practically everybody, and for the first time we're sitting on the same table with the government and basically drafting the policy that startups need. An innovative, this is not working, are you hearing me? Okay. Technology. All right. So basically this is happening. And the new law, the tax law for tax incentives for investing in innovative and startup companies or funds that invest in innovative and startup companies is for final discussion in Parliament, now you can hear me, on Monday. So in December, early December, it should be passed into law because this is the one subject, innovation and startups, that you don't have bipartisanship in Parliament. They all agree. It's a priority, period. Anyway, let me go right into this. One playbook for startups to scale. What's happening in Europe? Well, 500+ million market. Is it? We talk about, is it a single market? No, not really. We're talking about the digital single market or the vision for a digital single market and why that is important. But what is actually happening right now? On your way to unicorn land, what is the reality? Because it doesn't matter if you are in Cyprus or wherever, you're still in the European market. Well, most of the times you have more than 28 playbooks, 28 different rules. Every country is different. So you have to juggle through that when you want to scale. For example, well, we love regulating in Europe, so instead of innovating, we kind of over-regulate the death out of situations. Think of the VAT nightmare that's going on. Started last year, 2015, the copyright nemesis that's coming up. And what do I mean? Well, about digital VAT, what a nightmare. 2015, well, the European Commission thought that this regulation would be a great way to stop American companies like Amazon, Google, and Apple from exploiting tax loopholes. There's been a lot of discussion about tax. So they came up with this new VAT law that basically says you have to charge your customer the VAT of the country he's based in. Makes sense if you're, you're a tourist, you travel, you're in Paris, you buy something from a store, and they charge you French VAT. Makes sense. Now, take that in the digital world. You're a startup and you're selling online, and you have a customer that buys in Germany, a customer in France, a customer in Italy. And guess what? You have to account for all the different VATs. And it's not 28 VATs. It's 81 different VAT rates across the 28 European countries. Think that's an obstacle to scale? Kind of. It basically applies to everything, any cross-border sale. Bloody nightmare would be an understatement. Huge companies cannot comply. So what happens? Startups do not comply. Because when we talk about micro business below 2 million turnover, we're talking about startups as well. Now, of course, the Commission didn't go out to get to startups, right? They didn't do this on purpose. What happened is they didn't talk to startups. So they didn't know that it would have this effect. It's like, oh, we're going to get Amazon, Google, Apple. Ooh, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the leg. There's also different definitions of digitally delivered services across the European Union. Practical problems, most payment systems cannot support this 81 different VAT rates. And most importantly, a company needs to prove where the customer is. Startups rarely have that information, especially when you go through different payment systems. It might be, I don't know, the App Store, it might be the Play Store, it might be PayPal. They don't have this information. I might say I'm from Cyprus or maybe not, it doesn't matter. The point is that this applies and you need to be able to supply to the customer an invoice even if they buy a $2, €2 ebook online. You can't really see this, but this basically says where it applies. It talks about digital services. It's everything from ebooks, from physical books, What is that? I can't even read it myself. Well, it's a lot of things. It's not just physical products and sending physical products somewhere. A lot of things are included in that. So what is the Commission trying to do now? They actually realize, because there's been a lot of advocacy and a lot of kind of let's get together and fight this, and they kind of realize this is killing startups. It does not allow startups to scale. So they're thinking of a VAT-free threshold for startups. That's good, right? Well, there's another problem. You have to get 28 member states to agree what the threshold would be. Okay, and you'd think, oh, that should be easy. It's a no-brainer, right? Well, not really, because the thresholds in Europe vary. You have countries that have 0 threshold and countries that have threshold of 50,000. The UK is around 83 pounds, if I'm not mistaken, 83,000 pounds. And mind you, it costs about 8,000 euros to set up VAT compliance per country. You're a startup, you want to scale. 8,000 per country. Now, before I tell you how we're going to solve that, let's move into another nemesis, copyright. The problem with this regulation is that they are highly legal. Practically, you need a team of lawyers to tell you what on earth they mean. You can't really understand them. So what is this new copyright law they're coming up with? And mind you, this was it was branded as let's do copyright for the 21st century. All right, right now, technically you can't do a meme and publish it online. You know, having fun doing a funny meme, that's infringing copyright. In some parts of the EU, teachers can't legally, at least, they're not allowed to screen a film or share teaching material in their classroom. It's infringing copyright. You are in Paris. It's at night. You want to take a nice selfie of yourself and the Eiffel Tower that's beautifully lit. Well, guess what? It's illegal. You're infringing copyright. You probably think that's crazy, right? Or you would think that's crazy. So this new copyright reform is like a well-intended, with well-intent, a Labrador that has good intentions, but kind of you left it alone for too long and it practically destroyed your house. They mean well, the Commission does mean well, but the problem is this sort of new copyright law. When we talk about the digital single market, well, not digital, not single, and not a market, because it does not allow startup companies to scale. What it does is they kind of caved into publishing and media companies' lobby and forgot all about innovation. And we're talking about industries that haven't innovated in the last, I don't know, 50, 100 years. They're on the way to dying because they haven't innovated. And they're lobbying for new rules. And even though the Commission wants the new rules to be very startup friendly because they realize that the digital single market is for startups, it's supposed to allow startups to scale, they kind of messed up with this one. Toxic articles that basically, before, with the old law, if you like, the responsibility was on the user. So if you use a platform, let's say Facebook, just to name one, or Twitter, or whatever, this is not advertising, and you upload something on that platform, it was your responsibility as a user to upload material that is not infringing copyright. Well, guess what? Now, with the new law, one of the articles basically passes on that responsibility to the company. That's legal liability. It's huge. It's going to kill companies because it creates such a huge legal liability that basically is going to constitute them untouchable. News snippets. You know, when the aggregators like Google News or whoever, if you're a news aggregator, you present to your user a small picture of what, Financial Times says about this topic. So the users will click and go and read the original article. You can't do that anymore. They tried it in Spain and Germany. In Germany, it was basically voluntary, where the news pages could charge for the hyperlink. We call it the link tax, the hyperlink tax. In Spain, they made it obligatory. Why? Because they wanted to kick out Google News, one of the biggest news aggregators. So what happens after this law? Google News says bye-bye to Spain. And what do they realize after that? Well, funny enough, the publishing houses said, oh, shit, 70% of our traffic was coming from Google News. So they lost traffic. You would think they know better, right? Now, the problem with that is that startups that are in this, our news aggregators, will not be able to show, will not be able to aggregate. We do not want a hyperlink tax. This is getting very, very technical, but you could realize the legal implications for startups. And startups are not companies that have like legal teams of 20 people to translate everything. And this is exactly why regulations like this kind of go under the radar for startups, because you literally need a team of lawyers to understand how it applies to my company, if it's going to destroy it or not, if it's going to allow it to scale. And another thing, we talk about big data and data mining. Well, guess what? It's not going to be free for startups. It's only going to be allowed for non-commercial research entities, universities and research centers. Wow. A step towards the 21st century? Probably not. Obviously, because startups cannot afford to have such big legal teams, they need allies, right? The Gotham City Knights or whatever it should be. Well, they do have allies. One of them is the European Startup Network, because it's about being where the decisions are taken in Brussels, because some of the decisions are taken there, unifying the voice. A lot of organizations across Europe, actually we're in 20 countries at the moment, representing over 150,000 entrepreneurs. We have a loud voice, even though it doesn't show. And the European Commission is also politicians, and they like to see, actually they mean well. And that's the funny thing, that they do mean well. They were not out there to destroy startups or scalability. They were truly out to do digital single market. But the problem is, if you do not listen to the stakeholders very early on, and you don't know, because startups, wanting it or not, it's kind of the new fruit. It's not so new, but it's for the politicians, it is a new fruit, even across Europe. So coming together, what do? Data-driven policy advocacy at the European level. So we talk directly with the Commission and tell them, and sometimes not so diplomatically, that what they're doing is killing startups. European startup agenda, what are the big issues for startups? These are crowdsourced. You will notice there's been, in Cyprus, we've shared recently an extremely short survey, because sometimes, it doesn't have to be like spend 30 minutes of your time to fill in a survey. It has to be very short, very targeted to see, because it doesn't matter where you are. If you are in Cyprus, if you are in Luxembourg, if you are in France, if you are in Germany, believe it or not, we are facing exactly the same problems that everybody else is facing where it comes to getting our companies to scale. So use the power. Another organization that Startup Cyprus is also a member of is Allied for Startups, again involved with advocacy. This is a transatlantic organization. They were the guys behind the net neutrality victory. You remember net neutrality? Don't break the internet initiative. Well, we kind of won, because we got BEREC, which is the European Parliament committee, to change things to the favor of startups. So what are we doing here? Now, whoops, as far as the VAT is concerned, we have a campaign now, is literally why? The threshold issue. If it's too low, it's kind of fits the purpose of having a VAT-free threshold for startups. If it's too high, the member states are afraid they will lose money from VAT, because they see it as a cash input. It is money going to governments, right? So it needs to be properly ambitious to allow startups to scale. So we need to encourage our ministers of finance all over Europe to take that into consideration. That link in blue letters, it's a letter that will be sent to Commissioner Moscovici for exactly this purpose, and from there on to every minister across the member states. You think like, this is small. It's small, but it's big. It has impact because of the power. It's, you know, we always say unity is in power, right? Power is in unity. Reverse, power is in unity. It's all about uniting. It sounds like very Three Musketeers kind of thing, but it is. Because one startup alone in the southeastern corner of the Mediterranean, yes, cannot change European law, but we're not one startup alone in the southeastern corner of the Mediterranean. We are one among 150,000 entrepreneurs all over Europe, and our voice is loud, and it should be heard. So it's just a click, just write your name on that letter, and that letter will go to Commissioner Moscovici and express our thoughts on the VAT threshold. Very soon, we'll start the campaign on the copyright, because again, we need to be changing. The articles are going to affect negatively startups that are scaling. Why is this important for Cyprus? Yes, we are not even a market, basically, right? We're a small island. We're not going to grow any bigger. We're less than 1 million inhabitants. Okay, it is what it is. How do we flip that around and make it to an advantage? We're a fantastic pilot market. Yoria said it before. We have shipping, we have tourism, bunch of industries, English-speaking population. There's a lot of advantages. Let's not beat ourselves up. But one thing good that we had from day one for years is the fact that the Cypriots understand that they are in a small country, and they always look outside. They have an international perspective where it comes to market, even more so today than 5 years ago. To grow, you need to be international. Doesn't matter where you're located, as long as you reach out. So being part of the European ecosystem is extremely important for Cypriot startups and any startup, wherever they are. And if you're wondering who we are, Startup Cyprus is, well, these guys are responsible, and it's kind of like an inclusive ecosystem organization representing, we're one of the founding members of the European Startup Network, and we're members of Allied for Startups, and anywhere else we should be in order to advocate what's best for startups, whether they are Cypriots, because it's about, you know, when they say synergy, it's the sum of the parts. You can't have a couple of ecosystems going extremely well and the rest of Europe, you know, trailing behind. Everybody has to rise up in order for Europe to realize its vision, if you like, which sounds very romantic in a way, but the reality is that that's the only way for everybody to prosper, and we truly believe in that. And we're over 2,800 entrepreneurs in the ecosystem, people that are in the whole big family of Startup Cyprus in Cyprus. Cell is part of it. Everybody's part of that. Lots of startups, a lot of organizations that are supporting, accelerators, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, look around you. That's who it is. This is the ecosystem. It's everybody, because everybody has a role to play. Small, big, doesn't matter. We all pitch in, as I said, kind of like the Three Musketeers, only we're not three. We're 2,800 and growing. Well, keeping in mind that impossible is nothing, let's go ahead and sign that letter. Thank you. Questions?
We have 10 minutes for questions.
Wishes? You can shout. You can sing, whatever. Shout. I'm getting too old, you know.
Basically, my concern, and I'd like to get your take on this, is we see a lot of policies to be put in our world for research funding and innovation funding that are designed in a very pretty and nice way. They appear to be very targeted to a specific person. You put them up on a platform, they look perfect, they're complimentary, etc. But then when they're actually applied, they rank
Actually, it's a little bit of everything, including the fact that a lot of the people that are actually working on these programs have no idea about, you know, the business world, the innovation, the actual impact of what it will. They say they want impact, which basically means commercializing research, basically means having innovative companies, having startups, but in reality, they never had that experience in person. So what needs to happen is A, train them. They need to be able to understand. B, they need to talk to the stakeholders before, because they do mean well. It's not that, like, you know, they're out there to get the companies. Absolutely not. They want this impact. And if you notice in Horizon, it's totally changed. It's all about impact. And now they're considering of having an Innovation Rater Prize across Horizon. But we talk about Horizon. What about the structural funds? It's like, you know, a colony from Mars invaded and brought this new program with totally different rules that are killing startups. It's not startup friendly. It's not innovative company friendly. And you know what the funny thing is? There is an instrument. They call it the SME test, which sounds bad because it's called SME, and we do not want that in the sense. Startups are also SME. What is the big difference? Their vision. They don't plan to remain SMEs. They want to conquer the world. That's the big difference. It's the high growth potential. So they do have this instrument that they call SME test, and we were in a workshop in late September of this year about discussing what to do with this test and whether it should be, you know, integrated to become a scalability test. And what do they apply this test in laws, in new laws. And our take is, number one, you already have questions that have to do with cross-border trading and cross-border sales. That's scalability. If you're talking about companies being able to scale, it means being able to do cross-border activity. Kind of a no-brainer, right? You already have that in the test. But do not apply it only in the new laws, apply it in the instruments. So you wouldn't have this big difference between Horizon and structural funds that is like, oh, two things coming from the same source with entirely different rules. How did we end up having that? So it's all about talking to each other and training them. It's not an easy process. It sounds very, it will sound romantic in a way, but there's no other way. They need to be able to understand and get in the shoes of a startup and an innovative company to know exactly how it's affecting them. And it doesn't matter if we come from a small country. We do have a loud voice. I can guarantee that.
So let's say you're a startup and basically you have maximum 5 members. And like in our example, it would be 3 programmers, 1 branding, and myself for the business aspect. At what point should I pay attention to all this legislation? And I mean, how much time will I need to spend on this? And whether if I don't pay any attention, well, one day something will come and will tell me, you know, you have to die as a startup, as a company. How do I deal with this?
Well, you have to I would say you have to pay attention from day 0 to know exactly what you're getting into and what the legal implications will be, because a point would come where maybe investors will be able to, cannot touch you because of legal liabilities or because that legal liability is so big or it's unknown. The worst thing is if it's unknown, if it creates a gray environment, because investors like to know exactly what the liabilities are, whatever that number is, if it's a number. And you need to be able to know that beforehand to know how you can protect yourself. At least, you know, be aware of that. Obviously, as a startup, the number one thing you care about is, you know, making your company work, going to market, scaling, not understanding all the legalities and the laws, et cetera, it's not your job. Keep in touch with the ecosystem, because this is where, you know, the 3 musketeers come in. Because the whole idea is to make it easier. Seriously, guys, the first time I read the copyright law, the change, I didn't understand shit. I'm not a lawyer. It's really legal talk. Now, the problem is how do we translate that for startups to be able to understand? That's what we're working on. That's what we did with the copywriter, really breaking down and bringing home that this is exactly how it affects you. Check it out. Are you a company that aggregates news, for example? It affects you. Do you use data mining? It affects you. You need to keep, an open ear to what's happening without, it's impossible to ask startups, to hire lawyers and check all the legislature that's out there and all the regulations that are going on the European Union level and figure out whether they affect you or not. That's practically impossible. And by the way, one of the things they're asking basically startups to do, and they think that it's a kind of like, oh, but YouTube did it. You have to check, whatever they upload, you have to check if it's infringing copyright. And they say, yeah, but YouTube did it. Yeah, YouTube spent $60 million building a software to check the copyright infringement. No startup can do that. They're not supposed to do that, spend 60 million dollars, euros, doesn't matter what the currency is, to check copyright. It shouldn't be their legal liability. So yeah, Louis, yeah, you should get involved, stay in tune without, be able to get the information without having to spend way too much time on that. And sign the letter.
If I can just add something. The Commission is not just this big bad wolf that just throws out legislation and just expects everybody to comply, etc. There's information centers and advisory centers. One such center is the Enterprise Europe Network. It's a Commission initiative. It's co-funded by the EU and states that participate in it. Cyprus participates in it, and the partners in Cyprus are the Research Promotion Foundation, the Cyprus Chamber for Commerce and Industry, and the European Office of Cyprus. And they offer free advisory services for all SMEs, including if you need to learn about registering or legislation or VAT in another country, or how to export to another country, such things. You can learn about what funding is available, and actually there's a funding tool for startups coming up from the Research Promotion Foundation. It's called Research in Startups, and it's actually for the production of new products and services, new innovative products and services. All of these things that are a whole mess to actually find out about, you can actually come and find out free at the Research Promotion Foundation or the Cyprus Chamber of Commerce and Industry or the European Office of Cyprus. It doesn't matter where you go. We will signpost you accordingly, and you can get a service for free from that center. Yeah?
Shameless promotion there, Neri.
Thank you. Do you have time for one more? Yeah, one more question.
Thank you. Oh, there is nothing free. Somebody has to pay for it eventually. But since somebody, it's not free. It's just, anyways. To the client, my question is very simple. If you know, even if you have a complex legal framework in front of you, there are legal ways to tackle it. However, how do you believe startups should behave in the case that court rulings come and alter the way you were supposed to do business? And I would like to cite one example. Recently, there has been a high court ruling in the United Kingdom, and Uber drivers are now considered to be salaried employees of Uber, not self-employed individuals who actually take their car and drive and provide services. So this changes the whole model Uber is operating upon. If you are a small startup, you know these are the laws. You try and you set up your company within that legal framework where you have to operate. Often, different. You have different ways of operating in different countries because of differences in local legislation. But then one court ruling may come and turn everything on its head. What do you advise startups to do in that case, if there is any advice to be given?
Well, Uber is not really a startup trying to make it, right? It's kind of like already a scalable company. It's a scale-up, if there is such a word, because the Commission loves using the word scale-up. So I would probably not advocate for Uber. It's a bitch when you have a regulatory environment that changes, but laws are laws, and if there's a court ruling that says whatever, you have to abide by the court ruling. And actually, this is where opportunities are born. Nothing is always, nothing stays flat for too long. This is how opportunities are born. It's tough luck if you're a company and suddenly you have a court ruling that basically flips your model on its head and you can't use it anymore. But unfortunately, c'est la vie. If you haven't acted beforehand to make sure that this doesn't go there, and you have a court ruling, it's done. What are you going to do? Break the law? No. Find different ways. And the problem is that across Europe, and even in Cyprus, but everywhere, the law is behind. What's happening. It is totally behind. They're trying to regulate Airbnb. They're trying to regulate all these new business models. They don't understand them most of the times. I mean, what do you mean the biggest hotel company in the world doesn't own assets? What do you mean the biggest taxi service in the world doesn't own taxis? They don't understand this kind of business model. And this is where startups come in. That's the whole point. It's about innovative business models that allow you to compete with the big boys, right? That was a very sexist comment, by the way, the big boys. Anyway. Should know better. But yeah, you can't do much when there's already a court ruling. You have to abide by it. The point is, what do you do before that? How do you ensure that it doesn't go there? Obviously, one startup alone, it's extremely difficult. Extremely difficult to do it just by yourself. It's like trying to figure out, okay, who do I fight first? But get involved. Get involved in the local ecosystem. Get involved with the people that are trying to do that and help on a European level. I mean, for example, in October, policy summit of the Allied for Startups, we had Vice President of the Commission, Ansip, and he heard it. That's kind of like Greeklish for takuse kala, he really heard it because we told him what you guys are doing with the copyright law is going to kill startups. This is not digital, not single, not market. You need to rethink. And it's all about trying to catch it before it goes into European law and before, all the 28 member states start getting creative. Because usually when the commission, when a subject becomes too political, it kind of, and you have countries France doesn't want freedom of panorama because they want to protect their Eiffel Tower lit at night, and Italy has issues with freedom of panorama as well. So when you have issues like that with all the member states having, I want this, I want that, the commission would say, okay, they're not going to get in the middle of that because they're not truly the government of the European Union. They'll say, okay, we'll leave it up to the member states to decide. And when it's left up to the member states to decide, you have 28 playbooks. And good luck being a startup trying to, go from Cyprus to Germany, from Germany to France, from France to Italy, and basically conquer the world. It just makes it extremely difficult. And this is what we're trying to prevent, hopefully before it happens.
Thank you, Stavriana. Thank you very much.